Hello, and welcome to tonight's panel discussion. My name's Tim Rawlinson. We're at London Glass Blowing. It's hosting a very special exhibition, which is called Earth, Sea and Sky, and it's in conjunction with the Contemporary Glass Society, which is celebrating its 25th year, and that's one of the reasons that we're holding this exhibition, to celebrate that. But also it's the UNESCO Year of Glass 2022, so there's lots of key events happening this year, and this is one of the ones in which we're trying to shed a light upon different disciplines involved in glass. London Glass Blowing's got a long history with Contemporary Glass Society. Founder of London Glass Blowing is also founder of CGS, Peter Layton, and he's long since tried to maintain good ties and also promote the work that they do, like holding an exhibition like this in the gallery here at London Glass Blowing. Like I said, the title is Earth, Sea and Sky, so you'll start to see some of the work which maybe embodies these different elements. But there's also another side of that which is to do with collaboration, whether or not that be with another artist or perhaps with another discipline or another material. And it's meant we've got a really diverse selection of work here in the gallery, and it's been a really wonderful thing to see not just new artists but new ways of working with the material in the gallery. And I think that if you are able to come down and see this very varied selection, you'll be in for an absolute treat. And it's on for the end of the month. All I can say is I'd highly recommend it. And we're very lucky tonight to be joined by three of the artists. So tonight with us, we have Laura, we have Vanessa, and we have Verity. And they're going to be explaining a little bit more about their process and the work that they've made for the show. I might start talking to the first artist, Laura Quinn. I'd just actually like to take you over to her work, because glass has got a lot of people's idea of sort of fragility and maybe do not touch. And you sort of see this quite sort of spiky, almost like cactus-like piece, and you think, well, that would be so delicate, couldn't dare to touch that. But actually, it's embedded in, is that a silicon base?
Yeah, so it's a silicon backing in here, and then these are all individually lamp-worked glass components that sit into them.
So you can actually press right into the piece, which I really love the playfulness, Laura. I don't know if that's sort of part of that.
Absolutely, yeah.
See with this piece as well, you can press right into it. And with this beautiful wall piece, which has got a backing light. So is interaction something that you're wanting with your work?
It's the key part of it. Yeah, it's the key part of it. I think all along, really, with glass, the thing for me that I struggled with and to make peace with was the fragility and the fact that actually I really want to connect with people. And the fact that in most kind of occasions you can't really interact with the glass, but I really wanted to bring people closer to it as a material, to understand it a bit more and not be so scared of it. Just kind of thinking, how could I develop the relationship really between, you know, the audience and the pieces themselves. So whenever I show this work, I always encourage people to touch it and, you know, to really not be scared of it and not be scared of the noise it makes. And they're all really engineered to actually enable that. Each of these pieces in all of the works, you can pop them in and out. So if any one bit breaks, it's not a problem. It can just be taken out, it can be repaired and then put back in. So it's adding to the sustainability of the pieces over time. But it also actually allows them then to be redesigned. You know, if actually someone were to get any of these pieces over time, they could say, well, actually, I'd like some blue inserts or, you know, different colours. So it's that idea that actually the owner of the piece can feel confident with it and not scared of it and feel like they can really interact with the pieces.
Well, glass is a very tactile medium, and often that's sort of lost. So to have that interaction of where you do really want to touch them, but then, like I say, the playfulness of visually, you think, oh God, that looked too fragile or even painful in the spikiness. But since I knew I could touch them, I've not been able to stop. It's actually really satisfying, sort of, where you sort of press them in.
That's what we want.
Is there sort of, like I say, go back to the play element. Is there a sort of, maybe not childlike, but a sort of comedy element or the fun element?
Slightly. I mean, the form themselves, the form themselves is actually more taken from trying to kind of give people that idea of like the inflation and the elongating effects of glass blowing itself. So the forms, they're meant to be swooping and sweeping and inflating under kind of gravity.
So these are blown forms?
These are blown. And then
the fragments are flame worked?
Yeah, flame worked or lamp worked. So basically I blow the pieces. This one was clear and this one was black. Then afterwards I go on to the diamond saw, I cut out the cavity, and then I go on to the diamond lathe and bring it up to a high polish. I also cut the top off at an angle just to kind of open up the optic qualities in it. You can kind of see in this piece here as well, it shows off the fact that the black is only a thin layer on the inside, so it kind of highlights almost like the technical element of the piece. And then I back in this silicone layer in it that has perforations in it. So each of these little spikes, they have a wasted section, so they pop in and out. So it's, it's cold working, blowing, lamp working, and then mixed media all in one. So it definitely fit the brief of collaborations, I guess, across different materials and processes.
Oh, definitely, and it works so well as the final piece. You've used this technique then with the sort of silicone and the pieces for then jewellery as well.
Yeah.
Is this one of your pieces you're wearing?
This is one of my pieces, yeah,
it
is.
Very nice.
Yeah. So I'll kind of explain how it goes together. So we've got two blow-on sections, which I've sandblasted afterwards. I also cut them and carved them on the diamond lathe. But what I've got up here is a 3D printed ball and socket joint. And this was 3D printed in one piece with a dual extrusion printer, which allows me to make things in things that move. But the thing with this piece is that it actually has a fixed range of motion so that the glass doesn't hit off each other. And that's ultimately what makes it kind of wearable and more durable. But it's quite funny, I showed this piece actually a few years ago at Collect in Somerset House. And I took one off a wall for someone to try on, and they kind of said it's nice, but there's something not quite right about it. And I gave them the one that I was wearing. They said, oh, I really like that. But actually the reason they really liked it was because it was warm. Because cold glass, you don't think really you can wear glass, but as soon as it gets warmed up, or as soon as you sandblast the surface, it just suddenly becomes more kind of tactile and I think a bit more intimate. So yeah, it kind of fits every single wearer, no matter what their size or shape, just because of that range of motion.
The technology you've used for the process that you talked in the fastening, so is that something that's been like quite hard to adapt to, or something that you've done before previously? How do you it's such a traditional thing, glass making, and you've got such technology sweeping through. Obviously with Vanessa's work we'll discuss more on that, but how have you found that way of working? Is it 3D printed, the sort of silicon elements?
Actually, with all of this body of work, I went back to just using hand-making techniques. Okay. I used to do a lot of water jet cutting with my silicone, and I do other wearable forms that have water jet cut silicone. But actually, I found for these, it suited me to use leather working techniques with the silicone instead. So I used to use like leather hole punches, using a scalpel to create all the incisions. So I think what's really important when it comes to mixing new technologies with, more traditional glass making is that you don't do it for the sake of it, and actually you understand the relationship and at what point the technology, brings up the glass and highlights it, and at what point you need to actually kind of turn back to traditional techniques. So actually, in this body of work, it's all completely handmade, but I definitely look forward to using more digital in the future.
You use it a lot in your design process then, rather than the...
Absolutely. Yeah.
Could I ask you more about the wall piece, which is lit, and then it can transform sort of different colours and different things?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how it comes up on the screen because it's LED lights, so it kind of creates a bit of a strobing effect, so apologies about that for those at home. But yes, so this is made up, it's a steel frame, and then within the steel frame there's 2 rings of LED lights. So it basically is adaptable for whatever, shade a person wants within their home. But the glass itself is adaptable as well. Each of these parts, it's made up of 200 individually lampworked glass gill formations, and they each have little kind of knobbly bits on them too. and that allows it to pop in and out of the silicone, so that if any one part breaks, it's not a problem. But also, it just allows for kind of redesign over time, if anybody wanted a different color or just a different variation on it.
Oh, lovely. That's a beautiful design.
Thank you.
Over 200 individual elements.
Yeah, 200 individual elements. And as you kind of pointed out earlier, in this series of work, even though maybe there wasn't digital design brought into it as much, I did it with the plotting out. So even though it looks quite organic and it's based off of the underside of a mushroom, this is actually, there's a pattern in here and a sequence, and this was drawn up on CAD. There's 3 different lengths in it, and they basically are plotted as like long, medium and short, and even the little nodules on the back of them, they were plotted out as well. So even though maybe a digital design technology wasn't used in the manufacturing, it was certainly used in the overall design of the piece.
That's the key to your work. That's sort of what I meant before about using technology in that way to get the concept structure, and how then you would craft the piece. You also, in terms of hot glass, you're blowing, but you're also using the flame. Are you drawn to one more than the other? What you sort of see your next bodies of work being? Do you see them together, or
always. I can't settle on one. And then in cold working as well, especially on this piece here, you've got a keen eye for cold working, obviously. So even this is all lathe carved and brought up to a polish, and I really enjoy actually the kind of intensity of working in the hot shop, and almost like the risk and the uncertainty of the hot shop. But then I like to take those pieces out of the annealer the next day and start working on them on the lathe, and I really like that kind of certainty that goes with it, that you can slowly carve away at it to almost kind of explore and release the tactility in the surface. And the outside on this one is sandblasted as well, for that reason. So I think the lamp working, blowing and cold working, I think they're always going to come together in my work.
It's quite a discipline with the lamp working, isn't it? Because you'll make the same thing many times over. Trying to keep concentration, but the continuity with that. Something you find difficult, or are you very drawn to that way of working?
I think I'm drawn to that, and I think it's because it's a contrast to the blowing. When you get into the hot shop, I'm still like relatively in my early years of blowing, so in the hot shop you'll have varied success, and I feel like the lamp working and the cold working for me is what balances that, because it gives this continuity and the certainty to it that just balances out the kind of the risk from blowing. But I think there's a really nice relationship there actually between the two.
Well, it's got really wonderful work.
Thank you. Yeah, it was enjoyable to make. So,
oh, good. Well, thank you so much for participating in this exhibition.
Yeah,
really
it's
nice.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Next artist I'd like to talk to in the show is Vanessa Cutler. These are some of Vanessa's pieces that you can see here. These 2 tall pieces and the 3 here to the right. There's a quite specific technique that drives these work.
This work is 3D printed.
Okay.
With a combination of water jet cutting.
So which elements are the printed and which elements are the water jet cut?
The cast elements are 3D printed, and the elements in between, like the horizon lines, are water jet cut.
How long have you been working then? Because traditionally you've done a lot of water jet cut pieces. Is that right to say?
Studio practice, with COVID and the changes and everything that happened in that year, we had to do a change. So when I'm not working on water jet, I had to find another way to make those components. So printing seemed the obvious solution. So this is something I can do in the studio. I can print them at home, and then I can cast in the studio at home. Whereas with the water jet components, I have to go somewhere. So I have to do a journey. And within lockdown, when we were restrained, we had to find another way of working alongside. And the technology is always going to be there, but I needed to find a new approach.
Very often when you're put in that circumstance of needing to adapt, I think creatively it can then be quite exciting, the avenues it takes you. So
Yeah, well, I start with SolidWorks. I'll use a computer program. And I only use SolidWorks because I had to use it to teach my students. Otherwise, before that, I would directly use the WaterJet software or Rhino or whatever kind of CAD software was available to me. And, you know, the forms and the shapes and the challenges of what I want to achieve in terms of shape require me to kind of use the computer. I worked in a turbine company for a long time, and so I think the turbine...
I can see the inspiration.
I think the turbine is always something that's going to be with me because it's a shape that I enjoy, and it's a shape that challenges me in terms of angles and form and that dimensionality. So the 3-axis, the 5-axis, the digital printing, they all are challenging in their own right, but then I need to challenge myself in terms of how do I push the material to be 3-axis, 5-axis, etc.
Well, it certainly are challenging material, and I think a lot of what you do with WaterJet cutting, especially in this country, has been quite groundbreaking in what it then... just the way in which you're using material in a very mathematical way.
It kind of seems mathematical, but it isn't really. A machine will do whatever you want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just formulating a way of how to do it. You know, so it's about breaking down a shape, you know, whether it's 5-axis cutting, saying, right, that's a 2-dimensional drawing, but I'm going to make it look like it's three-dimensional. So in a way, it's about illusion, and it's about anything you do when you're making. There's a series of layers that you have to break down to formulate to create the shape. So it's like going through the process. I know that I have to cast a block to cut it out. I know I have to do the drawing. I have to do the cut down into the elements. I have to break down section by section. And then I have to kind of go, right, I need to cast the element. I need sheet glass for that. I need cast glass for this. I need to do a journey to go and do that. Oh, I can digitally print that, so I can do that at home. So I can do that within the studio, but what else can I do? And so I suppose it's like a long shopping list. We all have them, you know, the shopping list of what to do and where to do it and how to do it. And it's also like a jigsaw puzzle. You know, the thing I enjoy about making some of these is that I kind of know that they will fit together. And they will fit perfectly because, one, I know the material.
So how many components would be in a piece like this?
So within the casting itself, just the block with the clear and the white layers, there's probably there's a layer of clear glass in blocks, and then a sheet layer, then a layer of blocks. So that's one cast block. Then there's the components. Each layer has 2 components in the interlayers. There's 8 layers, and then there's the 7 components that are 5-axis cut. So in all, there's around 24 programs within that one piece.
And how is the final assembly achieved?
Well, they're bonded, so I stack and bond, and then I'll sandblast, and I use a kind of, to get that softness, I use a grit over top, so I get a kind of great big industrial decorator's brush. Okay. And I kind of do a kind of wash of water and carborundum all over it to kind of soften it down.
It's nice. It gives it, the way it holds the light with that finish, gives it that glow, which is very beautiful. Is the surface quality something that you sort of think about a lot? Because it's certainly the matte theme runs through that, rather than the natural gloss that you would associate with glass usually.
I'm not really into sheen. I'm not really into the shiny, but I think my training in architectural glass talked about light and shade and shadow, and about how you can draw the qualities of material out of a material, and how it can play with light. And I think with like the boys piece, it's about looking in and drawing your eye in and view into it rather than looking at it. You know, so I suppose the subtlety of colour and the shape and the form is because I want to draw you in to look more. I think sometimes if it's too shiny, you wouldn't see the form, you wouldn't see the shape, and it wouldn't draw you in. And I think with this, it's like with the castings, you have to look in. You know, you've got the darkness, you've got the play of the thickness and the thinness of the material, and that technicality of playing with that form and the glass, it kind of can, you know, make you kind of go, well, how did you do that?
Very much so, how did you do that? And it's great to understand a bit more about your process. I hope Anthony's shown, because I really like what you were just saying, of the fact to sort of smooth out a form, but then as soon as you appear within and you got to see the structure and a bit more understanding and sort of depth of what's going on, that's really the beauty of these pieces to me, definitely.
Well, the other reality is if you look at those pieces together, the boys' piece is in reality the internal shape of the other piece. So it's the fins being put inside and the fin rather than on the outside. So the initial thinking was like with the 5-axis water jet cutting, how can I do it internally rather than just externally? So I'm internalizing the propeller shape. Because I know I could probably cut these with 5-axis as well. But through lockdown and COVID, that's not something that was easily achievable. The companies I work with are essential services, so they were working 24/7. So I couldn't access them. So by doing the drawings and the designs and doing them, so I could kind of do them myself. In a way, it's like a test. If I can cast them, I know I can probably cut them, rather than I can cut them and not know how to cast them. So I'm kind of not just challenging myself, I like challenging the companies I work for. But the other one is the idea is that they wobble.
So in response to this exhibition of being Earth, Sea and Sky, you referred to them as boys? Is that
they're about
flotation?
These are about being on the water. I live by the sea, and these are about those buoys you see bouncing on the water's edge. You know, when you're walking along the shoreline and the horizon line, and everything on the water looks so calm, but they're all slowly moving.
Yeah.
They've got that kind of way that they are comfortable with their surroundings. And I suppose that coming back to that subtlety of colour and that subtlety of light is because they are comfortable in their surroundings, and the boys have to stay on the water, they have to stay floating, they act as an alert and for people, but the same, they're bobbing along, you know, just going with the flow, you know.
No, I'm always attracted to them as forms, the boys, or as my little niece calls them, girls.
Or buoys, and Americans would say buoys, so I have to, buoys. So, you know, but for me also they're quite decorative. They're a lot more elaborate than maybe I first imagined them to be. And also they're in colour. If I would have everything in white, probably, if I had my own way, but I knew that in terms of pushing myself and pushing what I felt they needed to be, I knew they had to have the colour. And they're all based around the horizon, they're all based on the shoreline. It's really, in some ways, these are pieces of where I live,
yeah,
and what I encounter from day to day.
Your work very often has that strong architectural element, so to see then the sort of response to nature within these is very interesting, whilst it's still holding that architectural aesthetic. Is that something that you're looking at developing more, or is it?
I've done a recent piece that's it's wall work, and I actually trained in architectural stained glass. So in some ways my work's always had an architectural feel to it. I've just played with scale. I think the next thing for me is to play with scale, and I'd like to go more into jewellery and more handheld and more pieces that are maybe slightly more intimate.
Okay.
Pieces, like Laura was saying, pieces that can mould to the body. I know that when glass is warm, likewise it will hold and shape, and it feels kind of comfortable. So I don't know. I quite like the idea of these being skyscraper in height, and I also like the idea of them being small little items. But I still want them to have the feel that you want to be drawn into them, no matter what the scale might be.
No, of course. I could imagine something quite, monolithic in terms of these, the way that, because it has that stacked element, I guess it gives you a bit more exploration in terms of scale. You could push that.
The scale could happen. I think the thing is, I think it's a bigger question in terms of what is accepting in the UK. I think we're still very much about small-scale works rather than large-scale, and I think if we could be more like the Europeans and the Americans and have that demand for being more expressive and more experimental maybe, but in terms of scale, and know that it would go somewhere, I think it'd be interesting. It would be worth worth trying out. But
the process would certainly lend itself to that.
It would lend itself. You've seen extrusion stuff with MIT, and they've done columns with the sort of like the 3D printing with the hot glass extrusion. So there's all possibilities. It's just a matter of having the right opportunity and the right person behind you believing in that, being able to apply it.
Of course.
But I don't really do anything just for the sake of it anymore.
No. But you've also been very involved in, researching this way of working with glass and pushing that forward in this country. And it's really a significant element within this CGS show. So it's great to have someone of your experience and expertise explain a bit more about this tonight. So thank you for that, and thank you for being involved in the show.
Well, thank you.
Final artist I'd like to talk to tonight is Verity Pulford. Hi, Verity.
Hiya.
So we've got a few pieces. Most of it's mounted on the wall. Is that something that's sort of key with your work, of being more sort of wall-mounted?
This work developed really from really small pieces that were kind of viewed as sort of a cabinet of curiosities.
Okay.
So they started off really like little playful experiments of building powders to make little small elements that looked like natural objects.
When you say cabinet of curiosities, do you mean almost like museum sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm really interested in that. And kind of merging the lines between what's natural and what's made, I suppose, as well. So I'm really interested in nature and small structures within nature. So I was trying to emulate that on I got an Arts Council of Wales grant, so it was part of that process. And then technically I just built them to be stronger and larger, and then I was pushing them to be something else really. I think mounting them on the wall makes people be able to display them in their homes.
You talked about sort of the natural element. You could almost, I know there are found elements within the work, but the glass as well, you can almost think could be something that was eroded over time and sort of found washed up. Like that crossover between being created or maybe just being natural is very clear in your work. It's very beautiful.
Thank you. So, my inspiration is nature and the stillness and the intrigue I find in nature. I love plants and trees and the light, and I find a real spirituality in nature. I live really rurally, and I'm always out walking, collecting little bits of plants, dried or things off the beach. And I've got loads of collections in my workshop of things like that. So that's always been my inspiration. But then I did a residency at the Walton Neurological Centre and got really interested in sort of microscopic structures as well, and the similarities of, say, dendrites and trees or lichens, things like that. They're all similar branching dendritic structures. So it kind of all came from that. I was looking at algae as well, and lichens and fungi. So it's grown from that, but then it's sort of become a magical, realistic thing as well, and they grow by themselves, and it's almost like a 3D collage of playing with what looks right aesthetically, what looks beautiful to me.
Will you make, because you've got various elements composed in each piece, so will you make one piece and those are those elements, or will you make a variety of elements and then start playing with compositions?
It depends really. So both. So sometimes I've got boxes full of little pieces that I've made, and I'll think, oh, that looks nice with that, what would that look like if it was double layered or whatever, and then I'll have to maybe remake it because it's the wrong colour or the wrong size or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of both, but it's definitely most of my time is spent playing with different bits of glass and seeing how they work together, or different elements that I've collected. And I use quite a lot of microscopic vintage slides that I buy, so I use all the labels.
It's almost like from an old apothecary or something.
Yes,
like
exactly, yeah.
that.
I love all that. They're from kind of 1880 kind of times.
Oh, wow.
Most of these slides, so Victorian gentlemen collected different things, and then they're all handwritten labels. So I tend to use the label and the actual piece, and above there is some sea from Bermuda, and then the labels up the top. So
So
but
it's
there's
really
also
personal, these pieces then for you. They've got a lot of your own...
My work is really personal, yeah. I mean, it's lovely exhibiting and being part of the community, but really I just like being in my garden, in my studio, playing about with glass.
Well, I'm glad that you're sharing it with us. I'm glad we get to see it.
Thank you.
And it's like you said, the little details, there's so much going on, you're really then pulled to those different parts.
I kind of feel like they're really precious, and that maybe you just stand on them on a walk or just walk past them without seeing the beauty of them. And we make things like all these beautiful things in the gallery, and it takes so much time and energy and resources for the world, but actually within nature there's far more beautiful things.
Well, you display them in a way that really does exemplify that beauty. I mean, Peter is an avid beachcomber.
Yeah, he told me.
Been on holiday with him recently, and I've seen it in action. He will trawl the whole beach, finding the perfect shaped pebble or something like that. And you're totally
jewels,
right.
Aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the way that you've then incorporated in your work, it's so tastefully done as well. It's not done for the sake of it. You can see that personal element, and I really do enjoy these. Could you explain a little bit more about, I mean, a lot of people will think the ceramic sort of has that quality, but this is all glass, the white material that you see, all the form.
Yep.
And a lot of it is formed with your own version of a pâte de verre technique, is that correct?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's powder formed, basically. So it's layers of bullseye powders, white bullseye powders, and I build them up layer by layer, firing by firing, until they're substantial enough. And then I put colour and pattern on them, and then layer them again with each other. Because
there's painting on some of the exterior ones.
Yeah, so I hand draw and cut my own stencils, and use stencils and bullseye powders to put pattern on. So the patterns have come from different algae and different lichens, so I hand draw them and then cut them and then use them as stencils.
Is this a process that you sort of figured out yourself, or is it something
that... Yeah, it's all come from... I got an R&D Arts Council Wales grant, and then that was after the Walton Neurological Centre thing that I did. And then I also got a production grant, so it's been about 5 years of developing different processes. But I trained in architectural glass as well as Vanessa, so I've got quite a lot of things that have come from that. So I still use painting quite a lot, and enamels, sandblasting, etching, all those kind of surface quality techniques, I think, feed in, and probably with the kiln formed glass make my work a bit different as well, because I've come from it from a different side, probably.
So to give a bit more depth to the pâte de verre for people listening, it's essentially crushed up glass.
Yeah, it's a really fine powder that I use. It's the finest powder that you can get. And pâte de verre means paste of glass, but I don't use any paste or any water to stick it together, so it's just layer upon layer of powder fused together in the kiln to become glass, basically.
So once the heat is introduced to that crushed up powder, it will then
sticks
form
together.
That solid piece.
Yeah, so it's melting together. So the higher you take it, the more solid glass it becomes. So if it's a lower temperature, it's quite brittle still.
So that's how you're able to achieve that sort of delicate cutout.
Yeah.
What I really like about that exterior form and the negative space is that because it's wall mounted, with the direction of light, the shadows that you then get are absolutely stunning. They're really lovely.
Yeah, and
I've done sort of added bonus of seeing it here in this space, or is that something you were trying to...
No, that's definitely something that I really noticed straight away. And these pieces, originally were mounted on the wall directly, and the shadows are even better then. But it's a real faff if people buy it to put them up themselves. And if I just did a large commission of 3 of them, and we had to drill every hole, so it's difficult. And I like it on a back disc as well, but
and that's glass as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes.
That's glass as well. Yeah.
How have you made so is that a solid piece of glass?
Yeah, it's just a circle cut out of a hand-rolled sheet.
Well, it's very effective. Thank you so much for giving us a bit more depth about your work. Like I say, really beautiful.
Thank you, Tim.
Really lucky to see all of the work that got here on display. If there's anyone that has some questions they'd like to put in the chat below, I do know as well that attached to tonight's talk there's the online catalogue, so you can see more of the works. Like I say, there's a large collection of artists involved in the show, some really varied works. I mean, if Anthony pans round, you've got a very large cast piece by David Reiki here. Got some new cloud forms by Peter, and then just raising up, got different things from blown glass, kiln glass, fused glass, an assembled piece there by Nancy Sutcliffe. There really is a wide variety of different techniques and aesthetics in this wonderful material. I'm also in this show. I'd just like to quickly show you one of the pieces that I've made in collaboration with a designer called Graham Reeves. He does a lot of various set design for companies like Swarovski and in the V&A, and I created this glass piece which he's then mirrored in wood, and it's all individual panels, but the way that he's managed to seal it together almost appears like a single block. And with the glass, it's got a dappled texture, which is done by chilling the glass when it's hot. And I'm trying to achieve the effect of light on water, so it's more responding to the sort of sea element. And what's nice is with a polished top, you sort of look through to the dapples on the outside skin, and I do think it looks like there's a body of water that's being held within the vessel. And then the dapples themselves has that sparkling element that you sort of get on water. It really does sort of look like different colours, which I quite enjoy. And a second piece that we made is a lighted piece. Got a lot of spotlights on in the galleries. Might turn off a few, and you can then see the projections that the piece itself then gives out onto its surrounding. So it's a wooden base that he's made with a strong LED light inside, and the glass is actually balanced into the opening of the form. Again with a dappled texture on the back, and then highly polished sides that then refract and dispel the light out through that dappled texture, creating the different coloured patterns on the wall. And that was really the aim of the piece, the way that the light passes through the glass, and sometimes those projections are more interesting than the piece itself, or at least just as important. And what's nice, again, how you position it means you create these different projections of light. And it's been a real pleasure working with Graham, who's got such an exemplary skill of working with the wood and a technical know-how of the lighting. It's certainly something that I would like to explore further. I might just ask, as we've got the great man himself, Peter Layton, is there any questions you have for these artists? Anything you'd like to?
No, I'd simply like. Sadly, I think we in the live audience were slightly disadvantaged. We couldn't hear every word, but what I did hear, I enjoyed enormously. I thought you spoke very, very beautifully about your process and your ideas and your work, and I have to say that that you three are amongst my all-time favorites here. So I'm really pleased. I got up from my deathbed to be here tonight. Not really, no, not quite, but I'm really glad I made the effort, and thank you so much for thank you for making the effort to be here and to give us such an amazing exposition of what you do. It really is marvelous work, and yes, for you ladies and gentlemen at home, please do take advantage of this fantastic show. It's well worth a viewing. Thank you.